What's up, everybody? My name is Hawk, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Hoops, a show where we have amazing NBA conversations. And today I have a really special guest. I'm on here with my guy, John Tortorelli, amazing NBA content creator, great TikTok content, great YouTube content, big Nuggets fan. I'm really excited to have this conversation with him today. As you guys know, I'm a Sixers fan. Got to talk about Joel, got to talk about Jokic a little bit. But before we get into that, John, thanks for coming on to the show today.
Thank you for having me. I've been following you longer than you have. And so it's probably been like almost a year now. And especially as you're a 76er fan that's unbiased and you're always easy to relate with. I'm a Nugget fan that's unbiased as well. So I feel like we can have a fun discussion today. Maybe get into a little heated Joel Embiid, Nikola Jokic debate. We'll see. I don't know. But it's always a pleasure listening to you. And now I'm here on the show. So I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Once again, thanks for coming on. So one question I like to ask all of my guests that come on the show. We're all NBA fans. We're all huge basketball fans. I like to just get a little background. How did you become a Nuggets fan?
My story is interesting. We were talking before. I'm from New Jersey, and you are as well.
Yep.
And as New Jerseyan, you have a few options. You could be a Knicks fan, which, it's never an ideal option unless you want to be tortured a little bit. You could be a Brooklyn Net fan, which I was. Then they moved the team to Brooklyn from New Jersey. And my favorite player was Darren Williams.
Ooh,
and when
nice.
he was gone, most underrated guard of that era, perhaps. I was like, damn. At the time, our family, we were starting to get some dogs, and the theme in their names was NBA players. So, my cousin's dog, they named theirs after Shaq. We named ours after Carmelo Anthony because, while the Knicks are hard to root for, I'm Italian, and the name Carmelo is perfect. My brother Nick loved it, and I wasn't a huge fan of Melo in New York. I felt he was a little bit selfish, but Denver Melo, when he was scoring 7 games against Kobe Bryant, that was a different type. And those jerseys as well, the powder blue ones, which we were talking about before, those were special as well. I loved them. And now they have the most underrated player of the year. I'm not going to say that the best draft pick of all time, Nikola Jokic. So it's always fun watching them now.
Yeah, definitely. And those mellow powder blue jerseys are also some of my favorite. Those are some GOAT jerseys for sure. Another question I like to ask everybody. NBA is full of amazing moments. What was one of your favorite Nuggets moments from this season?
It would have to be, he had like 3 game-winning blocks. And of course, there were the triple doubles. I don't know if he might have had 1 game-winning shot. And I think back to the game against the Rockets where post-game they're interviewing him. I think it was Katie Wingy. And you heard the chants, MVP, MVP. And Jokic after, blows him a kiss and he waves, and then he goes into the tunnel. And that right there is the stamp on his MVP candidacy and him being the winner. Though it was a very close race between him, Giannis, Embiid, even KD to start the season.
Yeah.
So I think that game in Denver against the Rockets where Jalen Green was starting to pick things up, that Rocket team was fun and exciting. That to me was the pinnacle of their season where, hey, look, they're playing with house money. They didn't have their second and third best players, even when there's 2 rotation players in Zeke Naji and PJ Dozier who had knee injuries as well. So, it wasn't just those 2 max contract players. So it was a special moment for Nugget fans to appreciate, even if they weren't going to have the postseason success that people would have hoped.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that moment is because me, on the other side of the spectrum as a Sixers fan, I remember that moment for the Nuggets because I remember watching that game. And I remember at the end of that game, I go, well, that was Joel's MVP right there. It's gone because that same week he had a bad game against Giannis. He had a subpar game against someone else. I can't remember off the top of my head. But then when Jokic having that really big game, and it's interesting because I think on paper, a lot of people initially underrated that win for you guys over the Rockets because I think a lot of people are like, well, it's the Rockets. But like you said, the Rockets were starting to put a couple of things together towards the end of the season and were becoming a really fun team to watch. So that was a big game for sure. So one of the first questions I have for you about your upcoming season with the Nuggets is Jamal Murray. He's coming back off of this ACL tear. I'm really high on Jamal Murray. He's one of the guys who I think is a really good starting point guard in this league. I think he has potential to be an all-star in his career for sure. One of the conversations I get into with even guys in my friend group and in my comment section is a lot of people undervalue Jamal Murray because they think the bubble was gas, And I think a lot of people forget that he had a really good 2021 season right after the bubble. Gave him 21 points on 40% from 3. Like, he had a really, really good year. I don't think the bubble was just gas. What are your thoughts on Jamal Murray?
You're 100% right. And we saw that when the Nuggets got off to a slow start in 2020, 2021, fans are saying, oh, hold up, this team might be frauds. I think they're like 8-12, and they were dealing with injuries at the time. And like you said, Jamal continued to have a career high in points, 3-point percentage, 4.8 assists. And NBA fans look at his highest moment. Much like Donovan Mitchell, he hasn't been able to return to those heights. We see TJ Warren, Anthony Davis was making shots in the bubble. He hasn't done that since. So there is reason to say, okay, well, he's not going to be averaging 40 points in the playoff series. That's okay. But Donovan or Jamal Murray does not have to average 40 points a game.
Yeah.
The Nuggets are looking for a guard who can create his own shot, knock down shots off the dribble, can score from all three levels, and most importantly, will reestablish the connection he had as that 1-2 tandem with Jokic. It was arguably the best in the conference alongside AD and LeBron because of the rapport they had built together after playing with one another for 5 to 6 seasons. And it really was something special where, hey, Jamal wasn't an all-star, but it's the Western Conference. There are guys like CJ McCollum that'll give you 24 points a game and they won't make the team. And Jamal, by the way, was just 23 years old during those seasons. So I say to myself, look, he's an underrated defender, very underrated playmaker, because, you think about it, I say it all the time, their offense is not run through their point guard. It runs through the best passer in the NBA in his position, in NBA history, and Nikola Jokic, who can create advantages for himself and his teammates because he's not getting guarded by opposing guards and perimeter players. It's usually big men who are not as mobile and, capable of dealing with the shenanigans. So,
yeah. And I think it's interesting that you point out the fact that, yes, the Nuggets aren't asking Jamal Murray to be their primary playmaker. Doesn't make any sense to ask anyone else but Jokic to be your primary playmaker. He's that good at it. But the fact that he does give you basically 5 assists a game is nothing but icing on the cake. So I'm excited to see him coming into this year. One of the follow-up questions I have for this, though, while I love Jamal Murray, I am questioning the rest of that guard core. I really like Bones Highland. I think Campazzo does some flashy stuff from time to time. I don't have many expectations for Ish Smith, to be honest with you. But I loved Monte Morris. I loved him. In my mind, he was probably the best backup guard you can have in the NBA. I think they're going to miss him, but I think there's a world where leaning on Jokic's playmaking will still make sense. I'm curious of what is your confidence level, I'll say, in your backup guard core.
That's the hitter right there because we all look at MPJ, the biggest question in the NBA almost to some people. But the Nuggets were at an inflection point, where you have 3 guards who are all under 6'4", and Jamal, Bones, and of course, Monte Morris, who was the most productive backup guard for the last couple of seasons. And when they needed him to start, he filled in for Jamal Murray admirably. They need a 1-2 combination that can knock down shots off the dribble, was efficient, and didn't turn over the ball. He did all 3 of those things, and when you lose a guard that's so young, so skilled in Jamal Murray, Monte was the perfect replacement. But we say this, and we see this all the time with NBA teams. Some things may run its course. Will Barton was a player who had been there for 4 to 5 seasons after being traded there from Portland, but in the postseason, he wasn't a natural fit. The movement, his ability to fit within the flow of their offense, and at the same time make timely shots when necessary, particularly when Jokic was out of the game, was not good enough. It wasn't where it needed to be, and this team needed a more natural shooting guard, similar to that Gary Harris that can just fit in, be a 3-and-D wing, you could plug and play, and that's exactly what you need next to Jokic. So the sacrifice in losing Monte Morris was getting a guard in KCP who fits exactly what this team needs. The prototype of that 6'5" switchable guard. He'll make shots. He's a good cutter. He has won at high level. He's had a lot of experience in the post. He checks all those boxes. And now you have Bones Highland coming in, the most energetic rookie last season coming off the bench, who wasn't putting up big-time numbers, but earlier in the season, he was in and out of the lineup due to ankle injuries. And for a 20-year-old guard who many people did not know coming out of VCU, they were shocked to see him dropping, bombs from 27 feet going in, beating guys off the dribble and showing some playmaking chops that can't fill in for Monte Morris. He won't be as good day one when the season begins, but in 2 years, you're looking at a guard who kind of compete in 6th man of the year discussions. And when you have that type of energy and skill next to Jokic, you can have Jamal Murray sit out some nights, and next thing you know, this guy's giving you 15 to 20 points, and it's okay. You can still win games and have an opportunity because of the way he invigorates this lineup and a team filled with, more experienced young guys that are veterans. And some nights they're going to need that extra gear, that extra punch. And that's what Bones will bring for them throughout the season. So I'm excited, man.
Yeah, I like that. And I'll admit, I was definitely one of the guys going into last year was not very knowledgeable on Bones, I'll be honest. But as I continue to watch Nuggets games more and more, I was definitely impressed with what he brought to you guys, and I'm looking forward to see what he'll do this year as well. You touched on it earlier when you said the biggest question mark for the Nuggets. This guy is the biggest question mark. He's the biggest X factor, and he could also be one of the guys who have the biggest impact outside of Jokic. Talk about Michael Porter Jr., obviously. Coming off of that back surgery, definitely a serious surgery. I think he has a potential to come into a situation where they can kind of ease him in, where they don't necessarily need him to be 100% from the get-go, because we saw how good that team was with just Jokic kind of sort of last year. But the skill is there. I definitely recognize that the skill is there. The shooting is there. He shot 44%, I want to say, in his second season that he was actually playing. What are your thoughts on MPJ going into this year?
You said it right there. They're not going to be asking this guy to run their offense. And that's not what he was in his second season when he averaged, 24 to 25 points per game, filling in for Jamal Murray toward the end of the year. His role is exactly what any contender is going to need offensively. A guard who not only fits within the flow of an offense and moves very well without the ball, is averaging 2 offensive rebounds a game, getting his opponent's misses, and a tremendous cutter and a very productive finisher, though he's not dribbling and beating guys to the rim for layups. What stands out is, for a guy above 6'10", his shot is unblockable, and it can get up over anybody within any slithering of space you grant him. Coming off a ball screen, he can knock down a ridiculous jumper from 23 feet in clutch moments as well. He has hit tougher shots in the fourth quarter when the team needs that extra gear, and he'll be the one to provide that coming off of Jokic's passing ability, which is special. So when you pair together the most dynamic passer in the game and one of the 5 best shooters, next thing you know, you have Jamal Murray weaving through screens, and he's creating for himself, knocking down shots as well. The Nuggets have the most dynamic trio in basketball because of how well they fit together. And when they're at full capacity, they've been to the conference finals. And keep in mind, Michael Porter Jr. was not starting for that team. That was his de facto season. Now he's technically going into his 5th season, though he's missed over half of his NBA career's first season and basically his 4th season after missing some parts of his first and second and thirds. It is horrifying. This guy's coming off a lumbar spine surgery, which I haven't done extensive research on that, but it sounds very invasive.
Yeah.
And it's not his first back surgery at 24. And we're looking at that for any player. We're seeing it now at Ben Simmons. That is a massive concern. And that stuff could linger for all we know. And if it does, that could throw the Nuggets' plans out of whack. Because without Michael, I don't think this team is special and dynamic enough offensively to actually beat a Golden State Warriors. I think in the postseason, you're going up against the Clippers and even the Suns, you're really going to need everyone, because we haven't seen this team at full strength yet. In order to evaluate where they're at relative to the Western Conference, they need to be close to full gear.
Yeah. It's interesting. Until you brought up that comparison with Ben Simmons, it's not something, even as a Sixers fan, I don't think I've made that connection yet. Because yes, the beginning of Ben Simmons' career was also riddled with back injury, and then he had the back surgery this past couple of months ago. Definitely an interesting comparison, because I was going to try to give you a little silver lining of making the comparison between Joel Embiid, a guy who's basically missed half of the first couple of his seasons as well, and his career's since panned out to be one of success. So hopefully that's something for Michael Porter Jr. as well. You talked about your big 3, and we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the man in the middle, Jokic. Now, it's a long shot, I'm sure, but I'm curious on your thoughts on this. I can see a world, potentially, once again, long shot people, where Jokic could potentially be a 3-time MVP. Now, I know that's a very rare feat in NBA history, but when you look at the fact that he won last year, the fact that adding even more pieces because of health, or health we're hoping for, I can see that teams' overall wins being higher, and I can see him putting up even better numbers with having some less defensive pressure, with Jamal Murray and MPJ taking some of that pressure off of him and having some of their own, I guess, say, offensive gravity, to an extent of themselves. I could see him having an even better season than he did last year. So, first question, is voter fatigue a thing? Is there a world where he can get 3-time MVP in a row? And then the second part of that is just, what are your thoughts on Jokic going into this season?
So that feat right there has only been done 3 times before in history. Bill Russell in the early 60s, Wilt Chamberlain in the late 60s,
Oof.
and Larry Bird in the mid 80s. Now, the first two in Wilt and Bill, that was not voted by media. That was voted by players that were
Hmm.
on the court with them. And so let's just say Jokic does the impossible that hasn't been done in what, almost 40 years. We're going to be looking at this guy, not only the best Nugget of all time, but maybe a top 25, top 30 player within the next 2 seasons, because winning 3 MVPs in and of itself puts you in the company of LeBron James. Giannis hasn't even done that yet. And now to do that in 3 straight seasons, only 3 other players have done that. That is unheard of because this guy's only 27 years old, going on 28. Now, with that being said, we have to come back to reality, because as much as I love Jokic and as historical a season as he had last year, in a season where they were playing with house money and we all knew they weren't going to contend in the postseason, akin to maybe Kyrie Irving his first year in Brooklyn with KD, although Jokic is a couple levels above Kyrie in all due respect. The issue with Denver is not only has they not been healthy the last few years in the postseason, missing Zeke Naji, PJ Dozier, and of course the two stars, but Jokic has run out of gas, and not just run out of gas in the postseason, but run out of gas early. Last year in the Warriors series, by game 2 or 3, the dude was shot. And
Yeah.
after going to, was it 6, 7 games with Portland, in the Phoenix series, he had nothing left in the tank as well. And so for Michael Malone, he has to take a step back here and say, okay, we've won regular season games. But when you look at the Clippers, Tyronn Lue does not care about the regular season. Steve Kerr's not fixated on that. Any elite head coach or just grandmaster is going to think 4 or 5 steps ahead. If you're thinking 1 or 2, you're going to slip on something that you're not even going to look out for because you're not even prepared for it. So I think for the Nuggets, Jokic has been a player that's played 75, 73 to 80 games a season. That number has to be cut down. And I mean notably or noticeably. I think much like Jamal Murray and MPJ are going to rest games this season, I would expect them to play no more than 62. Jokic shouldn't play much more than like 67 that way. Well, he wants to compete and he wants to put himself in that same company as Giannis and all those other players. For this team to actually win a title and evaluate where they stand against Phoenix, Los Angeles, the Clippers, not the Lakers, although they're in that discussion in the back. Obviously, the Warriors, the Grizzlies, they're the number 2 seed last year. The Timberwolves are looking to enter contention as well. You need to actually have Jokic at full capacity or somewhat close to that to gauge what he can do now that he has all of this support and a team that's built around his exact skill set.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point with, I don't want to use the word load managing Jokic, but something similar, akin to that or similar to that, because when I look at the roster, I think the talent is there for a deep playoff run, and I would hate fatigue to be the thing that stops, the Nuggets from being all that they could really be. So we talked about your big three: MPJ, Jamal Murray, Jokic. Who's another guy on the roster? Could be just a guy who's just your favorite guy, a guy who you think has high upside. Who's the other guy on your roster when you're tuned into a Nuggets game, you're just really looking forward to seeing?
I've got multiple, if that's okay. The first
Yes.
is a guy in Brooklyn and Bruce Brown, who the last 2 postseasons, when the Nets have struggled, has been a consistent defensive game changer that gives you energy. He's starting to make 3-point shots. And when it comes to cutting, playing off the ball, and being that center offensively, he fits into a similar style or similar niche to Aaron Gordon, where the cutting and the constant movement and just a winning player that will do it on both ends of the floor is something the Nuggets have been starved of. In order to beat Golden State, you need to have versatility in your lineups, big time. You can't just have
Yeah.
one way of doing it with the size, because the Nuggets tried that with Jokic, Aaron Gordon, Jeff Green, Will Barton. It was ugly. You need guys who can get skinny and get around screens and at the same time switch on the different guards and wings and hold his own while setting a level of toughness and intensity that the Nuggets did not bring against the Warriors until like game 5 or 6 when Aaron Gordon was starting to get a little PO'd and he was actually starting to play like an NBA player at that point. They need that intensity. And so when you have obviously Aaron Gordon, I just talked about, and now Bruce Brown, they had a player in the draft in Christian Brown, who at Kansas was an NCAA champion and plays with a level of grit and intensity that you hate to play against him, but you love when he's on your team. Brown, we don't know if he's going to play a big role in this offense or in this rotation in general, because Michael Malone last year and years before hasn't been kind to playing young players. And, especially on a contending team, it's tough
Yeah.
day one. But I think in the postseason, guys are going to go down. People are going to be missing, especially if MPJ's out of the lineup. They've seen what a guy like Devon Reed is, let's say. But I think Brown can add a layer of two-way upside that is just more of what this team may need down the stretch in the playoffs, where, hey, maybe he plays 10 minutes, gives him a much needed spark with Bones Highland, makes it through 3-point shots, plays well. He's a good athlete. Maybe gets a steal or two for a transition dunk that'll light up this crowd. And that's why I'm excited for Christian Brown out of Kansas. I think he was a very good pick for them. And I'm really excited to see what type of role he can play for them in year one for that very reason.
Nice. I like that. I like that. So this question literally just popped into my head. And it is a genuine just curiosity from a Nuggets fan, because from the outside and looking in, it didn't make a ton of sense to me. I was harsh on this decision when I was doing my offseason gradings. The DeAndre Jordan signing confuses me. And the reason it confuses me, because once again, on the outside looking in, I thought Boogie was a solid fit for you guys. And in terms of production, I can see Boogie's and DeAndre's production being very similar. Is there a thought process of maybe Boogie wasn't, like, from a Nuggets fan, was it a locker room thing with Boogie, do you think? Was it just maybe they didn't see the fit? It was just a very interesting signing to me, and it literally just popped in my head as we were having this conversation. I'm just curious over your thoughts on it.
When I saw they signed DeAndre Jordan, I thought the same thing. You saw him in the 76ers. It was between him and Paul Millsap, and they said, okay, even Doc Rivers, like, fine, I'll play B-ball Paul for the love of God. All the fans wanted, I guess, oh, wait, he's actually helping us win games. You believe it or not? It's not 2017. DeAndre Jordan, in all due respect, he might be the worst player on the court in the league. But
I don't disagree. I agree. I've said that before.
It's for that very reason that he might also be the best teammate in the history of the NBA. I mean, he's a player that's been to so many different spots. And Draymond Green talked about on a show where he goes, look, DeAndre Jordan, he may be closer to the end of his career than he is the start of it. And I'm like, really? I didn't know that. But the thing is, for a guy on an opposing team like Draymond to give him that, basically the question that a comment asked him was, who's one player in the league who you don't think gets enough appreciation for playing that Udonis Haslem type of role where you're more of a player's coach in a way? I think every NBA team needs that veteran who has been around the block, and especially on a squad where Nikola Jokic in practice is going to need some size and competition to go up against him, talk some trash, get him going in the locker room, will get him pumped up. I think DeAndre Jordan can be that hype man away for them. Now, letting go of Boogie to get him was a little bit of a head scratcher, because at the end of that series versus the Warriors, he was actually playing well for them and giving them an offensive spark with Jokic on the bench that really stood out. It was what allowed the Nuggets to actually beat the Warriors in one game. So I can't exactly answer why Calvin Booth, their new GM, decided to not sign him in place of DeAndre. But like I said before, he either has crazy blackmail in the NBA or he's the greatest teammate of all time. I'm going to go with the latter, because I really do think that can make a difference for a team that it's tough to play 82 games and then have championship aspirations. And, you need someone who can kind of help you get through that time, because it's tough. And that's why I think TJ is in this mile high. We'll see what he can contribute this year and what type of energy he may bring with the pom-poms.
I like that answer. And it's definitely an aspect of it I wasn't necessarily thinking about, of the off-court stuff, because I do agree. Me and my friends, one of my good friends is a big Miami Heat fan, and we make fun of him all the time. It's like, oh, Heat legend Udonis Haslem is resigning and coming back. But it's because of some of that off-the-court stuff that is the real thing. Being able to have that leader in the locker room who's been around the NBA for a while to kind of take some of the young guys underneath his wing, and in your case, being able to be another strong body to battle against Jokic in practice to make sure he stays on top of his game. So I can definitely see the value there, but it definitely also was a genuine question. So we talked a lot about your Nuggets. I know you're a huge Nuggets fan, but I watch your content. I know you also just love the NBA in general. What are some other NBA teams you're just excited about going into this season?
I've got two, one in the East and one in the West. The one in the Eastern Conference last year was a top 4 seed when most people had them as a top 5 pick coming into the season. And they have one of the best young guards in the game, who I've compared to Jamal Murray in some ways as an all-around shot creator, and Darius Garland. Evan Mobley going to year 2. This is a guy who's drawing Kevin Garnett comparisons. Yeah. Jared Allen, in my opinion, he's underrated. I think he's better than DeAndre Ayton and what he can bring to a team as a rim protector, and he's even polished up his offensive game into being an 18-point-per-game scorer. I think those two guys, you just can't finish on them. And even if you take one out of the game with Mobley adding some size, he has a tough work ethic. He's going to gain some weight. And I think he can play the 5 for them. Now you have Darius Garland going to his 4th season. Just 2 years ago, he was the worst player in the NBA. So can he take that next step in his game into not just an all-star, but all-NBA player? The Cavaliers are a fun team to look out for if they can just stay healthy. Because last year they're ruined by injury, and that was why they didn't
Yeah.
make the postseason or the playoffs. They didn't make the postseason. The other team is the most interesting team, and I'm gonna be honest with you. I love the Nuggets. I don't think I'm gonna miss a single Minnesota Timberwolves game next season. They're the most fascinating team I've seen in so many years. First off, Anthony Edwards, I think he may not just be the best player from the 2020 NBA draft. When you look at 2021 with Cade Cunningham and Evan Mobley, 2019 with John Moran, Zion Williamson, and 2018 outside Luka Doncic,
Yeah.
that's including Trae Young. I think he'd be better than a Trae Young. I think this guy can be a top 10 player because once he adds that mid-range game to his arsenal, this is a consistent league-leading scorer that is a pain to deal with in defensively because he's versatile. You look at Boston, those switchable wings, they may not be the most refined ball handler or polished passer, but they don't have a weakness. And the playoffs, that stands out against a team that does have smaller guards or slower big men.
Hmm.
And they can create advantages for themselves and their teammates, which is really where the NBA is gearing toward that versatile, smaller style. And I think Anthony Edwards will be maybe a face
Yeah.
of the league in a few seasons. So now you add in, of course, Rudy Gobert, who basically makes your defense automatically top 10. The Timberwolves last year had a good defense, but it was playing an aggressive style with Jared Vanderbilt and Patrick Beverley that was not sustainable long term. But with Rudy Gobert, it is. So I'm
Yeah.
fascinated to see what that partnership with Cat's like, and of course, how Anthony Edwards can progress in his 3rd season.
Yeah, it's funny that you bring up the Minnesota Timberwolves. They're definitely a team that I'm excited to see because yes, I agree. Rudy Gobert, I love Rudy. I'm a center guy. I love centers in the NBA. Rudy Gobert, I say, is a walking top 10 defense, very similar to I say Trae Young's a walking top 10 offense. They're just some players are just polarizing like that and have that impact on the court. Uh Rudy is a guy who I'm curious to see what Minnesota does as well. I think their move is definitely, and I agree with what you said about Anthony Edwards, shows that they believe Anthony Edwards is that superstar. And I agree. I think he can be that for them. Curious to see what 2 7-footers look like on the same court in today's modern NBA, but I'm excited for it. I'm
Against
definitely
2
excited
teams
for
that
it.
are zigging when everyone else is zagging with the double
Yeah.
tower lineup.
Yeah. That both of those teams are digging exact. Yeah. And yes, Darius Garland. Oh my gosh. I love his game. But John, thanks so much for coming on the show. This has been a pleasant, amazing conversation. I hope if you're watching this, you enjoyed it because I enjoyed talking to you today, John. I'm going to have all your links down below in the description, but also let the people know where they can find you.
Thank you for having me on. I'm a big fan of your content as well, so I'm happy to be a part of this. You can find me on YouTube at John Tortorelli. Last name's Tortorelli. I started a podcast too. You can watch Hawk Soups first and then the Wise Guys podcast second on YouTube, Spotify, any audio platforms.
Nice.
And of course, thank you again. It's been a blast and love talking to Nuggets any chance I get.
Yes, man. Awesome. Thank you.